Hello everyone. Today I'm gonna be talking about submarines, or actually the issues that comes with bringing submarines to the game and playing against them. I've already covered subs a fair bit. They haven't actually changed since the last time I covered them, which was mostly from the perspective of the submarines themselves. Now I'm gonna be talking about all the issues that adding submarines to the game will bring. First, there's simple mechanical stuff, like targeting them. You don't actually get any visual feedback when you're shooting a submarine, because normally you lead a ship based on what you see. You can see a cruiser or a battleship or whatever, you can see what course he's taking, you can see the way he's turning, you can aim based on basically the 3D model that you're seeing in front of you. With submarines, there is no visual feedback, because he's constantly hiding underwater at 5 point something meters because of the bobbing mechanic. I'll get into that later. So what you're basically seeing is a periscope, and the feedback that you get on his movement isn't nearly good enough in the actual game, so you end up staring at the minimap all the time. So fundamentally the visual feedback is terrible. There should be the sub's ability to sit at the border of invulnerability while having the benefits of no real visual feedback for enemies, besides the periscope sticking up, is silly. Speed should at least be limited compared to actual surface traveling, because why is he able to travel 5 meters underwater and be just as fast? Why would you ever be at the surface when you're just as fast but you have no 3D model to shoot at if you're sitting underwater? It doesn't make any sense. But the subs themselves, are they overpowered? No. In a 1 versus 1 situation, they are far from it, provided you have ASW, aka anti-submarine warfare. The silliness of the subs is that if you have anti-submarine capabilities, you crush them, but if you don't, even the biggest potato will eventually land torpedoes on you from complete invulnerability. Or if you do have some sort of hydro, whatever, you can keep them spotted, well, then you can't kill him and he can't kill you. Once again, I'll be going into that significantly more later. So the real question is, what do submarines bring to the random battles exactly? So far, it seems like it's mostly frustration. Oh, and more passive play. Whole heaps of it. If you lack anti-submarine warfare, then, well, you're not gonna have a very good time. In fact, I'm showing an example of a Fuso. I'm sailing in the blind until blap, torps out of nowhere. 2 subs were actually sat 2 kilometers from me. Even surviving the first strike isn't enough, because I can't do anything about them, even when I'm sailing right over them. And this feels like such a rinse and repeat situation of being struck by a carrier when you have no anti-air. Extremely frustrating, as you know there's nothing you can do whatsoever to deal with the enemy, whereas the enemy needs to execute only the most basic of gameplay to decimate you. Even something like a cruiser behind an island can be blind shot, or a smoke shooting DD cruiser can be punished by good aim from a battleship. I mean, I've done plenty of blind firing guides. And something like a DD YOLOing you, well, he has to land torpedoes, or you're gonna smoke him afterwards. Against the subs, there is really nothing you can do. And if you don't have anti-submarine capabilities. But even the concept of countering subs feels like it's inspired by the meaningless counterplay against carriers. First of all, if you want to get them killed, you better hope they are potato. No surfacing means that anti-submarine warfare is mandatory. Which brings me to the question, why did they remove the oxygen counters again? Why can the sub maneuver at full speed even without battery power? Why can it regenerate battery power underwater? These things all mean that if you don't have anti-submarine capabilities, you have no means of forcing the ship to surface ever. I saw 3 or 4 surface ships sail on top of a submarine who kinda just zigzagged below them. He couldn't hit them from directly underneath, but the surface ships had no way of damaging him because of the endless power and oxygen. He never had any need to surface. If this is Wargaming's solution to short blowout battles, it's a terrible one. It was mindlessly boring, and more importantly, it was so stupid to watch. But even with anti-submarine capabilities, it's not thought out at all. Because, well, the ships that have it are DDs and light cruisers. Basically, the two squishiest classes in the game. And now, the way to deal with the enemy subs is, of course, basically you sail on top of them and you drop the depth charges. But that leaves the issue that you actually have to sail on top of them to do anything. It's not like a DD pushes into a cap and your friendly DD spots him and then you can nail him, or you can maybe radar him or something. No, the only way to deal with him is literally to sail right over him. Now the issue here is, of course, that the submarine spots you as you're closing a distance, and even when they dive underwater, they can still keep you spotted. And even when they're using their maximum depth consumable, basically that reduces depth charge damage, even when they use this consumable, they can still keep you spotted while you're trying to kill them on the surface. Now, if the submarine is a potato, and he pushes in too far, yes, he's very easy to kill, but any sort of sensible submarine player will quickly learn that they just have to play a bit safer. If they play a bit far back, you have no real means of dealing with him. If you try to push in and kill him, well, his team is gonna melt you because you're a light cruiser or you're a destroyer, neither which deals well with incoming enemy fire. At tier 6, it isn't that bad because, well, the games are kind of disasters right now, but as we go into higher tiers and we have some real firepower, it's gonna become a complete mess. There's no way you're gonna pull it off. Then there's, of course, the fact that with that bobbing thing that I spoke of earlier, if the sub actually comes up above 6 meters, depth charges suddenly do no damage, meaning you have to focus it with guns. At which point it can dip underwater again, thanks to the ridiculously fast diving and ascending. What I don't understand, why is there no cooldown on this, or even a longer delay on either one? Why, like, even the DD has to slow down to use its smoke when it's spotted. Like, if you spot the DD, he has to slow down and use his smoke, and it takes you like a few seconds for him to fully stop and go dark. But why can subs basically just full speed dip underwater then surface at will like a cork? And why is it suddenly immune to its counter, which is the anti-submarine warfare, aka depth charges? Like, these things, okay, I hate using any sort of historical thing, but it just seems so silly because these things literally could damage the destroyers that they were dropped from. That's why when destroyers dropped depth charges, they had to go at full speed so they didn't end up wrecking their own hulls. And this little bobbing tin can rises from 6.2 meters to 5.8 meters, and suddenly he's all immune to it. Yes, I know it's an arcade game and I hate quoting anything like that, it just seems so ridiculous. Honestly, it feels like it's almost intended to be as frustrating as possible to deal with. And in fact, I can only imagine matchmaking without these classes. First of all, I hope if they add submarines to any sort of matchmaking, whatever, they require there to be light cruisers or DDs, because if they just add them without a counter, it's gonna be like adding a carrier into World of Warships. Oh wait. Anyway, if there's poor players in these classes, it's also gonna mean terrible games. Actually, hell, saying poor players isn't even necessary. What about how overloaded the DD class is becoming? Like wargaming, CVs aren't allowed to control their own consumables or to command their ship while planes are up. All they have to care about is flying their planes around going brrrr and dealing damage to whatever ship they please. God forbid if someone shoots down a squadron, then they're getting nerfed and they're crying on the forums, how dare he have actual functional AA. Meanwhile, DDs, they are expected to spot for the team, they're expected to cap. They are expected to defend caps. They're also expected to deal with other DDs, managing concealment between these DDs, worrying about potential radar DDs that you're adding, and of course Hydro DDs. They have to of course manage enemy torpedoes, as they are almost always the first ones to see them because they are literally the front line. And then you have carrier attacks, especially rocket planes, which are completely ridiculous, sometimes incredibly stealthy. And then you have to play around stuff like radar cooldowns as well, and now you're adding stealth radars. Okay, seriously, why are you adding stealth radars again? Why do Soviet ships get stealth radars. Anyway, we're not gonna get in there, but they have all this shit, and then the DDs need to try to deal some damage as well. Because most of the things I listed, you don't actually reward with any XP. Well, very, very little XP. So they have to try to deal some damage as well. So they have all this stuff lined up for them. And now they're also supposed to handle the anti-submarine warfare duties for the entire team? Like, where is the consistency? Wargaming, you are well aware of how questionable the average player is. Like, you literally made carrier consumables automatic, and you didn't allow them to control their own ship because you know just how potato they are. Yet you are willing to completely overload the DDs, while CVs are treated like basically royalty. Made so simple, even the worst of the worst carriers is a significant threat to the best players out there. And you add this additional burden on them? I don't understand. These ships, these submarines will completely throw balance out the window. Any concealment values on DDs are irrelevant if submarines just outspot them all. These ships, the DDs, live and die based on their concealment. Now you'll trivialize that value even further? Because CVs already trivialized them quite a bit. But going back on the terrible games issue, I don't want to get too sidetracked here. If one team loses their DDs, the enemy subs basically get to play a farm fest. And considering how often you have DD suicide in the first few minutes of the game right now, consider adding a class that becomes unstoppable once the DDs are dead. How fun is that for the remaining ships? Spoiler alert, it's not. You get the role of being the clay pigeon in a shootout, something we have experienced quite enough of during the double and sometimes even triple CV games. This is going to be exactly the same. Honestly, but even disregarding all these balance issues, disregarding all these extremely questionable design decisions, worse than all of this is the boredom, the feeling of emptiness that this class brings. The biggest impact of subs is that they take away 3 surface ship slots, and they have almost no interaction on the surface. The battles feel emptier, desolate, with everybody just doing less as there's less ships to fight and interact with. The subs mostly do their own ping and torpedo minigame. They kind of park in the middle and then you ping and torpedo whatever comes in range, and it's completely disjointed from the rest of the ships. Like, if you seriously try to add subs into the game, it would need to be in the form of extra slots, making the game like 14 versus 14 or 15 versus 15. But considering how choked the wargaming servers already are, hello, desync issue, still there is no way these servers could actually hand the extra load of another 6 players on the server. Sub versus sub battles, well, since we're talking about countering subs, they're probably one of the most boring fights out there. Kind of just as before. It's non-stop pinging and torpedo spamming, but it's kind of hard to actually keep track of what the UI is telling you regarding. You don't really know if the torpedo is going to be able to curve or hit or whatever, and ultimately it's most of the time you do very little effect until one side gets bored, either rams you or runs away, or just some anti-submarine warfare ships comes over and ends the fiasco. Or alternatively, the rest of the ships do something actually useful on the surface and win the game for either team. That's usually what happens. Ultimately, subs are terribly implemented right now. They are boring to play, they're boring to play against. They remove from the active surface fleet, which means overall less action and interaction, making the battles feel empty. They provide even more spotting, especially against DDs, a class that already has a lot going on, which means, of course, more passive playing. The homing torpedoes, ignoring torpedo belt, and just a complete lack of counterplay means BBs will play even more passive than before, something we absolutely did not need in the game right now. But, okay, besides complaining what is wrong, what are some things I would like to see? Since sometimes people actually tend to listen to me, God forbid, I'm a big mistake. First of all, the stupid bobbing up and down that renders you either immune to all underwater weapons or immune to all surface weapons at will has to go. Like, just add a delay on how fast the sub can dive, or like if it surfaces there's a small cooldown before it can dive again, or something. Doesn't have to be that long, but it shouldn't be this instant bobbing up and down like a cord. It's supposed to be a vessel, not a toy, even by World of Warships arcade standards. And second, spotting mechanics need to change. Subs being able to spot everything in their torpedo range regardless of depth, being able to proxy spot without being proxy spotted themselves, and just nullifying DD concealment is just terrible. Surface concealment needs a nerf, and more importantly, if the submarine dives, it should come at a heftier cost to its spotting capacity, or just at a heftier cost in general. Like, diving down should limit the submarine more than it does right now. Overall, third of all, counterplay is needed on all classes. There shouldn't be a situation where ships are completely outmatched against another. They can be heftily in a poor situation. For example, if you're in a 1 versus 1, you're a battleship against the destroyer obviously has a significant advantage in that fight, but there's a chance you can maybe pull off some heroics. So it means some form of anti-submarine warfare needs to be on all ships. It doesn't have to be great, or it doesn't have to even be good, but there needs to be some sort, because having no tools to deal with a class harassing you is a dreadful experience. Carriers. Speaking of counterplay, get rid of the infinite underwater crap. Seriously. I don't care if it's a short surfacing that's required, but subs sitting underwater permanently leads to some horrendously boring gameplay, with a single sub sucking his thumb while the rest of the enemy team basically falls asleep on the surface. It's a terrible experience. Ideally, this ship should never see random battles, but honestly, with the way Wargaming's pushing it, it's obvious they want to squeeze it into random battles. But honestly, it might be even worse balanced than carriers in terms of game enjoyment when facing one. But if they really have to add them, player limit needs to be increased. These 12 versus 12 games with, like, you get 3 subs, you get 3 DDs, and then you get a CV, and suddenly it's a 5 versus 5 with the surface ships. Like you look around and it's nothing but desolate and emptiness. It's ridiculous. It needs to be more slots available if you want to add submarines to it. Overall, okay, I'm sorry. This ended up being a pretty long ramble. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for your support as always. And if you do feel like it, drop me a sub, pun intended. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a great one.